Okay, goal of today's demo is to show you how to run two threads. This is important when you've got your user interface that you want your buttons to continue responding while something else is happening in the background, which will be necessary in your project. So the quick example here, if we click the start button, it's got three modes. It's got adding 3, subtracting 2, and just generating a random number between -20 and +20. And we can alternate between these on the fly, as well as if we stop it and start it. So let's go ahead and build some code for this. I'm assuming that you've built your user interface to match. What we're going to need is 2 more files in this project. We're going to need one for keeping track of which mode we're in, which we're going to create with an enum. That stands for enumeration, basically just meaning list out all of the possible options. I'm going to call it number mode. And these need to all start with a letter. So we're going to have +3, -2, and randomized, and end it with a semicolon. And that's all we need in this file, just listing out the 3 modes that we're going to have. We're also going to create another class, which is going to be where the calculations will happen. So I'm going to call this number thread. And the key piece to this is that the super class for it is going to be called thread, which is built into Java. So let's use control space to bring up our autocomplete. Notice how it's in java.lang for language. So that's a built into Java thing. And let's click finish. What's going to happen is this code is going to activate as soon as we click the start button. And the code that is going to run is in a method called run, which we can create from the thread class. So right click and go into source, override, and implement, and we're looking for run. We don't need this basics in here, that's fine. Let's go back to our designer here, and we're going to add some code to the start button. When we click the start button, we want to create one of those new number threads. So I'm going to use a variable called nt. And when we pass it, or when we create it, we want to tell it which mode we want to be in. So I'm going to use mode in the brackets here. We're going to have to figure out what that mode is in a sec. To start out, I'm going to just put in number mode +3. And if we're going to do that, passing along a mode, then we need a constructor with that as well. So let's create a constructor that passes along the number mode. And using control 1 here, let's make a new field for it, which is which mode that we are in. And that's going to be important inside of run here, because we're going to have some code that is going to check what mode it's in every time we go to do a plus or minus or a randomize. And this number thread, we're going to need a field for it because we only want to create one of these at a time. So let's create a field in the frame. And if we click the tab button, that'll look like protected or private, either's fine. I've got a number thread called nt. Let's make sure that we don't create duplicates of this though. So if nt equals null, then we can create the thread. And therefore, when we click the stop button, let's make sure that the thread, if there is one, gets shut down as well. So let's check and make sure that the thread is there to stop. So checking if NT is not equal to null. Then we want to pass along a message which we're going to make. We're going to call it kill. We'll create that together in a sec. And after you do that, set the variable back to null. So let's create kill in the number thread. And all that we're going to do with this is, let's make a Boolean here. So private Boolean running, which will start out with true. And when you get the message to kill, just set the running to false. What we're going to do inside of run here, because this is the code that's going to run in the background, is while running is still true, it's going to keep going through that loop. We are also going to need an int for keeping track of the current number. So I'm going to call it value, which can start out at 0. And while this thread is running, we want to do either the +3, the -2, or the randomize. So we can do this with if, else if, and else if, or we can also do it with a switch, which is nice when we've got an enum here. So because we've got an enum that has only 3 possible options, we can get Eclipse to generate based on this. So let's switch off of the mode. And notice it is going to pop up that we need cases for each of them. And if we use add missing case statements, it'll go through and find all of the ones that are out of this file for you. And now we can do stuff with our value. So +3 is value plus equals 3. -2 is value minus equals 2. And randomized, let's come up with our random number, which is going to be math.random multiplied by 41, take away 20. There are 41 integers in this range, right? There's the 20 negatives, there's the 20 positives, and there's 0. And then we are going to set our value equal to r. And after this switch case runs, we want this to do a bit of a delay. So the way that we do that in Java is with thread.sleep, and the milliseconds in the bracket are how long you want it to delay for. There is 1,000 milliseconds in a second, so we're going to delay for a third of that, which would be 333. And there's a possible exception for this, which won't ever come up for us, but we just have to deal with the exception anyway. And in our case, the way that we're going to deal with that is if an exception happens, just stop the thread by setting your running to false. We also need to have the text box in here because we want to be able to see what our number is. So let's have a txt_value.setText to show the value. But we don't yet have that text box in the number thread. So we're going to pass that along. So when you create the number thread, let's pass along that text box, and we're going to add the text field to that constructor. And we can use Control-1 here to assign it to a new field, which I called txt value in this file. And let's give this a run here and see how we're doing. Missed a step. When we create the thread, we need to start it. Oops. So threads get created and then started. After you start the thread, Java does some fancy stuff, and then it invokes your run method. Let's try that again. Here we go. So we've got our +3 going on, but we don't yet have our radio buttons working. So that's a first step. We also need to update the number of steps that have taken place. So in order to do that, let's pass along the text box for it. So we've got our txt steps here, and we can add that to the constructor as well, and add it to a new field. And we need to keep track of the number of steps that have occurred. So that's a int, which we're just going to increase with ++. And let's update that text box as well. And let's have a look at that now. Okay, so notice how that's now updating, going up by 1 every time. And let's get some listeners on our radio buttons so that we can have the mode change over time. Notice that our stop button is working. We've got a start and a stop. Okay, so let's go to our radio buttons here and let's add some action listeners. So let's go to the change listener for state changed, which will activate when the radio button goes from a selected to unselected. And let's add that to all 3 of them. So event handler change, state changed. And the last one here, state changed. Now the thing that's a little bit unintuitive with these listeners is that they activate when you go from checked to unchecked, as well as unchecked to checked. So the first thing that we want to do is check if it is becoming checked. So we're going to do that with an isSelected. And we're going to have a method on the number thread We also only want this to happen if we have a number thread to change. So we're going to have a method called setMode, and we're going to change it to the correct one out of the enum. So that's a +3, and it's going to be the same kind of code in all 3 of those listeners. So we're going to do the -2 and change the mode, and this is for randomized. And now Eclipse offers us up that we can create a set mode in the number thread. We can do it that way. So let's change and we're going to pass along, I'm going to call my variable the new mode, and all we need to change is this field up at the top here. So our mode is now switched to the new mode that we passed along. And so our effect is the following. We've got +3s and -2s and randomizes. And so the really important thing is that even though we've told the thread to sleep for the number thread, the thread that is running the user interface is still live and active and can be responding to our radio buttons and our buttons and all of the clicks that we are activating. You're going to need that for your receiver thread.